So my topic for you this afternoon is the Federalist and Greek history. Now, it's already been well established that the Founding Fathers were well versed in classical antiquity. They studied Latin, they knew Greek, they could translate from English into Greek, Greek into Latin, and vice versa. And most of them had a very well-grounded classical education. It's therefore not surprising that they would look to classical antiquity for models and examples when they were looking to frame their own constitution at the Constitutional Convention. Of course, the two biggest examples that they would look to were Greece and Rome. Now, Rome was an easy one to appeal to or to look at. Rome was more or less a unified nation with a central government based out of Rome in the Italian peninsula, and you could talk about it in terms of its governance structure, and it was particularly the purview of anti-federalists who would look at the Roman Empire and say that a centralized government was unable to control such a wide and expansive territory. Classical Greece, on the other hand, seemed to be the area of federalists. But to talk about classical Greece is much more difficult. Again, speaking about Rome as a more or less a unified political entity, classical Greece was nothing of the sort. It was more or less a collection, an amalgam of city-states, all of which I'm sure you have heard. You've heard about Athens, of course. You've heard about Sparta, Corinth, Thebes. These were the great city-states in the peninsula there in Greece. They would occasionally come together to ward off a foreign invasion. Most famously, they're the Persian invasion, the Persian Wars. But any more than that, they were simply a loose confederation, sometimes with some agreements for mutual defense. But otherwise, separate entities with their own laws and government structures. Some kingdoms, some oligarchies, sometimes a democracy thrown in. It was on June 6th of 1787 that James Wilson stood up in the Constitutional Convention and mentioned the Amphictyonic League. Again, probably had the same response that I just had now, which is silence. I can picture Andrew Hamilton off in the corner thinking, what is that? Or he knew and said, I should do something with that. So off he scurries into the library to find out what he wanted everyone else to know, that the Amphictyonic League was an ancient Greek confederation. That's what he would have you think. That eventually fell under the influence of Philip II of Macedon and his child, whom you'd come to know as Alexander the Great. Within 2 weeks, Alexander Hamilton has done his research and he's up giving lectures about the Amphictyonic League. He compares it to a loose union and therefore compares it to the Articles of Confederation. James Madison, also in the same month of June, has gone and done his research and has started talking about the Amphictyonic League, talking about its various weaknesses. This Amphictyonic League that everyone is talking about is as of much discussion as almost the Constitution itself. It keeps coming up over and over and over again. It's not just confined to the Constitutional Convention either. When the representatives go back to their various states, they also start to talk about it. Hamilton in New York mentions the Amphictyonic League. Madison goes back to Virginia, talks about the Amphictyonic League. In all of these, this Greek federation, as they would have you believe it, is compared to the Confederate States as they are bound together under the Articles of Confederation. It also makes its way most prominently into the Federalist Papers. Jay mentions it in Federalist 4 and says that states would not mutually defend each other if they were loosely bound together. James Madison mentions it in Federalist 6 in reference to internal strife. States would fight amongst each other. And finally, in Federalist 18, it is almost the entirety of that paper is the subject of the Amphictyonic League. They go on to say that this loosely bound confederation did not fulfill its purpose. and it eventually caused a collapse. He says, "Such were the consequences of the fallacious principle on which this interesting establishment was founded. Had Greece," says a judicious observer on her fate, "been united by a stricter confederation and persevered in her union, she would never have worn the chains of Macedon," that's Alexander the Great, yeah, "and might have proved a barrier to the vast projects of Rome." Oh darn, if they only had a stronger confederation, they would have been better. Well, of course, opponents to these thinkers are not going to let this go by lightly, and they met the challenge. Monroe said that the Amphictyonic League failed because it was trying to unite too many different forms of government. You may have had oligarchies in one city-state, you may have had a democracy in one, you may have had a republic in another. It was also noted that in this sort of loose confederation, larger city-states tended to oppress the smaller ones. So if you think about the Virginia plan, where larger states get more representation, larger states might start telling the smaller states what to do. And they also said, but it is decent enough for mutual defense because it was during the time of the Amphictyonic League that Persia invaded Greece, and Greece managed to ward them off. So maybe this isn't such a bad thing. But so much for this Amphictyonic League, which the Federalists would have you believe it is. Now let's have a real look at what the Amphictyonic League is. Good luck trying to spell it, by the way. Amphictyonic, Amphictyonic. The Amphictyonic League is basically, not to dumb it down too much, a religious organization or confederation. This word it comes from, Amphictyones, means people who dwell around something. The Amphictyonic League's purview, as it were, was to defend the Delphic Oracle. The Delphic Oracle is where you wanted to know something, you'd send someone to Delphi, ask the Oracle, get your response back, right? So it was in the best interest of all these city-states to protect that land and do what was best for it. The Amphictyonic League had some powers over its various members. It could fine them. They could get expelled. They could punish you if you did something you weren't supposed to. And perhaps most saliently, they had the right to declare sacred war. What does this mean, sacred war? It sounds interesting. Most of these sacred wars were basically over who controlled the territory where the Delphic Oracle was located. Could you tax people who came to go consult it? Were you harassing folks? And so control of that territory going back and forth would occasionally lead to a sacred war being declared. But in general, the Amphictyonic League had no power to compel another member of it to do anything. And it certainly could not prevent conflict among its various member states. People got in fights all the time. And most of these fights were indeed internal. And most saliently, it's pointed out that the Amphictyonic League did nothing to prevent the rise of Philip II of Macedon, later his son Alexander the Great, who eventually conquered all these various city-states, and they fell under his control. So what we have here isn't really a federal system, but its vision of it through the lens of the Federalists is presented to people to show the dangers of decentralization. Again, as I mentioned before, it favored larger states at the expense of the small. It did not prevent interstate war. If you were loosely bound, your members might fight amongst each other. There are many historians who would say that it's because of this interstate war that Philip of Macedon was able to come in and take over Greece because they had all weakened each other. He was just there to pick up the crumbs. Likewise, it cannot prevent a foreign invasion. And finally, it can sometimes devolve into anarchy, all members fighting amongst itself. So for the Federalists, this image of the Amphictyonic League highlighted the failures of a loose confederacy. It became almost the poster child for it. But however, going back and looking at what we know about Greek history, about this alliance, about this federation, it becomes clear that Greek history in the Federalist Papers only bears some resemblance to antiquity itself. But perhaps in making history, the Founding Fathers had to make some history up. Thank you very much.
Freedom 101 is made possible by generous support from the University of Oklahoma Alumni Association. Freedom 101 is a program of the Institute for the American Constitutional Heritage at the University of Oklahoma. For more videos and podcasts, visit freedom.ou.edu.